for event.
Okay.
And a few years back, and so we've just left it up in the middle of the museum so people to socially distance kind of walk around it to
Right,
keep
right,
crossing over each other.
right,
And,
right.
and it works because when I need to have a presentation, I have an instant backdrop.
Beautiful. Yep, you just set it up right there. You got it. Yeah, very nice. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and hit record, right? So we can go ahead
I
and
think it says you're recording.
okay.
You did it already.
Yes.
Do you see it? The red button is blinking. It says recording.
Yes. Okay.
I just didn't want you to stop your recording.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm learning this. I don't know if you know Jackie Brown. She used to work with the Amarinda. She's Wampana.
The name is familiar for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. She's a Lakota, and her elder mom is Ina McNeil. But anyway, she's the one that's been kind of showing me how to work. She was doing it, but she's got so busy with her job. She's like, I'm gonna show you a few things and let you go. And so
Yeah, we all have been living and learning from each other on the Zoom. And, you
yes,
know, if you're on it enough, then you get the little tricks
get
of
the
the
tricks.
trade.
Now I'm an actor here in New York, right? And that was so I've been doing a lot of Zoom, but I've been just on the acting side, right? So I don't really engage too much as far as like how to set things up and all of that kind of stuff, you know. So I just been doing acting. I just been reading lines, and that's really all I did. But this whole thing is process. It's a good process. It just takes a little while, you know. So yeah. So I guess when I want to go to start, I would like for you to introduce yourself to everyone. I don't know if you ever done anything for Amarinda, but you know, you do know of us. We are we are the only American Indian arts organization in New York City that is primarily for preservation of Native American art and mixed media and theater, right? So it's been around since the 80s, and I think 1978 or 1980, somewhere around there. It's about 30 years, 37 years old. And you know, we pretty much help Native artists, you know, curate shows and stuff like that. Diane Frere is the director, and David Martin, whom you know well, is the chairman of the board, but he also is a co-director now with Diane. So, yeah. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and you know, a little bit about your background and your community that you represent and your area.
Askawee Kwasin, Natasuis Makasini Pashao at Nahai Gansek, Natasuis Lorén Spears at English at Nin Nahai Gansek Nahantik, Kanupiam at Aki at Nahai Gansek Ka Mahaan. So hello everyone, I'm Lorén Spears. I'm the executive director here at Tamaquag Museum, which is in Exeter, Rhode Island. I am Narragansett Niantic, and I'm part of the federally recognized Narragansett Nation here in Rhode Island. And I welcomed you to our homeland. And here at the museum, well, I'm the executive director. That's a fancy title to mean I do a lot of things. So my degrees are in education. So I come at museum work from a cultural background through my family, through the arts and culture and traditional knowledge. And I weave that with my educational experience. I was a public school teacher. I ran a small school here called Nuichuan School for 7 years that had Native children from kindergarten through grade 8. Some of those students came back as high school students and interned in the museum. We have an amazing mural on our wall here that is work that was done in collaboration with Debbie Spears Moorhead, who's a Seekonk Wampanoag artist that lives in this area that I've known for forever. And she did an amazing job with the students, and she's done many murals around Rhode Island, many of which we referred, you know, the people to. She did a mural in downtown Providence, I think in the Olneyville area, that showed the history from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, 2000s, and so forth, with the idea of understanding whose land that this urban environment is on, and understanding the space and the history of colonization and conquest, and how we're still here.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That, oh, I mean, speak of murals, I just helped David with a mural, like he's a painter. And I mean, they are so, when they're done right, they tell such a beautiful story, right? And you feel it. You almost can feel yourself travel back in time. It's much different than looking through like a history book or whatever, and then you hear the little details and the stories. That's wonderful. You kind of have a similar background like myself. I pretty much approach what I used to work for the Commission of Indian Affairs when I lived in North Carolina, right? I lived there well, pretty much most of my life, and I moved to New York. And so I approach culture as a way of education, right? So I used to be a gym teacher, and so say and basketball coach and all of those things. So yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for introducing yourself, giving that land recognition there. It's very important. So just kind of to get things kicked off, I know, like I said, because time gets by. I talked with Tom Porter last week, and I mean, the time was gone like that. He loves to talk, right? So, um, and so I know you probably talk about this story a lot. This is the month of all of these stories that we seem to be the most demanded natives in the planet during the month of November, right?
We're still native the rest of the year.
Yeah, right. So it's like the Indian in the comfort thing. You pull them out for November, right? And you get all these stories and backstories, and you put them up. But yeah, I mean, I feel exactly what we're laughing at.
I'm so exhausted when it's finally Thanksgiving. I about 10 years ago, I
Right.
swore off doing anything that weekend at all.
Right,
You
right,
know, no, shopping on, you know, Black
right,
Friday,
right,
no doing an art market on the weekend, just nothing. I
right.
just can't do another thing.
I totally, it's yeah. I mean, I've worked with some of the museums and the public schools here in New York, and like I said, I got something to do for a drum workshop next sometime near the end of the month in DC. Right? It's of course Zoom. But it's like it's interesting. It's just so interesting. But so just if you can just kind of like maybe just share from your perspective, since your community and along with say the Pequot and the Wampanoag community has such a direct contact with this whole experience of what the world seems to think is Thanksgiving. What we know is a much different story. Are there any key things that you'd like to just kind of share that kind of comes to mind, that you
Sure.
really feel that is either misrepresented or should be shared, because most people don't really have the true concept, right? Because things as things go down generation and generation, they just get so diluted, right? Even when I think about, like, I used to deal with how traditional tobacco was used in our community, right? And look at it what it was, say 200-300 years ago, as opposed to how it became commercialized, and it just lost whatever it meant long ago, right? And so I would think that your story is the root of all of these other derivations or these crazy things that have come from it, but your story is the true story. So you mind sharing that a little bit with us?
I think that the general public has to understand a few things. One of which is that traditionally we celebrated 13 Thanksgivings, one for each new moon of the year. And even today in our communities, we celebrate many more than the harvest Thanksgiving. Whether that's maple sugar Thanksgiving, the ice fishing moon in Thanksgiving, whether it's the corn planting moon in Thanksgiving, whether it's the strawberry Thanksgiving, the green bean Thanksgiving, the green corn Thanksgiving, all those summer ones, of course, with harvest from the sea, what we might consider a clam bake today.
Right.
The whaling, that was a big harvest and a big celebration and Thanksgiving. I mean, that fed many villages with whaling and the collaboration and cooperation, whether that's the cranberry Thanksgiving. And I always like to think of the the ones that have remained even through this day, it's because of their importance in our history. You know, cranberries were so important because they gave our people such important nutrients,
Right.
vitamin C during the winter, because as we all know, cranberries dry beautifully. You know, they can be thrown in soups and stews, put in your pemmican, which is, you know, dried meats that are pounded and have cranberries and or
Right.
other berries and nuts in them. You
Right.
know, you can you can put the cranberries in so many different foods in order to keep you healthy during the winter. You know, the harvest Thanksgiving in our community, on a non-COVID year, it happens right at the beginning of October, because you know, individually we were still doing it, but normally we'd go to our own tribal reservation, to our community center, and actually have that harvest Thanksgiving
Right.
together.
Right.
And um, it's right after the harvest. It's not a month or more later, you know, and then you know, there's the hunter's moon and Thanksgiving, there's the Nakomo and Thanksgiving, and so on. So there's these 13 Thanksgivings historically, where we give thanks to the Creator for the gifts of the land and the sea.
Right.
And we give thanks to those animals and plants as living things that gave their lives for our life, because as humans, we need to eat,
Right.
and we need to eat those living things.
Right.
And I think that that's the first thing they need to know, is that there's all of these Thanksgivings, not one Thanksgiving.
Right.
Two is that in the creation of what this nation is now called the United States, they have to come up with um, a firsting and a lasting. There's a book by O'Brien, I believe is the author's last name, that speaks to this. Um, it's the idea that you have to have the last of a certain tribe, the last person that lived long ago, the last real Indian. You see me air quoting there. Even in my lifetime, so Princess Red Wing, who was a remarkable Narragansett Wampanoag woman, who was the first person voice of this museum. She was our original curator. We often to refer to her as a co-founder with Eva Butler, who was an anthropologist. It was originally Eva's personal property, that the museum, where it was located and what the original collections were from. As a anthropologist, she was collecting native materials and belongings from communities, but it was Princess Red Wing who worked with her to actually make this museum have a first person voice, from an indigenous perspective. The only person still living from those very first days is Tall Oak Whedon, who's, you know, 80s now. And he was a young man at the time, and working with Princess Red Wing. And the point of that being really important is that in the Providence Journal back in like the 70s, the big headline was "Last of the Narragansett?" ? And in order to justify the conquest that took place here, they have to create memorialization for indigenous people that we're gone and of the past. And so then they have to give the first thing, which is, you know, the founders, you know, the founding fathers, the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams. You know, we put these people up on pedestals, you know, we hero worship them. When I say we, I'm talking about Americans, not necessarily indigenous Americans, but it's like Columbus, you know, they put him on the pedestal, they make all these statues, and they can't understand why we're so infuriated that they're still celebrating a person who initiated genocide in the Americas, you know, that came here using, I have 5 points of conquest. So conquest is about greed. You need the people that have power have greed for the money, the resources, the land, the trees, the resources of the places that they're going. The people that follow them often have need. So they're the average people that don't understand the dynamics of what's happening necessarily. They just have need for their own family. So they follow behind the people with the greed, right? The people with the greed have power. They have political power, military power, economic power, police power, weaponry power, all the different kinds of power. Then they're entitled, which technically is another kind of power, but I feel it's so powerful that I put it separately. So this is the notion that Columbus feels, because of all the power of the king and queen of Spain, that he's entitled to go to a new place, shove a flag in the ground and claim it for them, right? He can only feel that entitlement because he has all this other power, but it's this notion in his head that this is right, they're justified, this is something they have the right to do.
Right.
To continue that, they promote fear and hate. My perfect example of that is the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
This country is founded on fear and hate. They did all this conquest over here that I've already mentioned, greed, power, entitlement, and then they promoted fear and hate. Because if you haven't read the Declaration of Independence recently, take another look. Partway down the first page, or first several paragraphs, it says one of their major goals is new appropriations of land. They're just making these 13 colonies into a new country, but they're already envisioning westward. And so in order to justify that, they call us indigenous people merciless Indian savages whose known rules of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So they promote that fear and they create hate. The average person, they're afraid of Native people before they even get there. They're already ready to shoot us because they're already afraid. They've been fed the propaganda. The last one, censorship. They take away your voice. We have no voice in the political process. We have no voice in the media. We have no voice in education. We have no voice whatsoever. And literally by lasting us, meaning there's the last of, you eradicate that we're even here. I work at a Native American museum. I have people, grown adults, that come in here that are like, they're still Indians? It's because they've been fed the propaganda. They believe that we don't exist. And if we do exist, it's only when we're all dressed in traditional clothes and performing for them in some kind of way. And so this is all like, the conquest is all part of this story. It's all part of the first Thanksgiving, because it's their story, their mythology that justifies their being here. They even twist it sometimes and make, one, it's this whole fantasy story of this coming together and we're all best friends kind of notion. And that we skipped merrily into the future. What they forget to tell you is the conquest that was happening, the warfare that was happening, the genocide that was happening. And the genocide was done in multiple ways. It was complete, shooting and killing in war of people, but there was also burning your food sources. If you starve people out, that's an act of war. When you burn the corn caches in the food stores, that's an act of war, whether that's here on the East Coast or as they went westward and they're killing off the buffalo herds or the, whatever, all the beavers or whatever is the food source for the people, the whales, blocking your fishing and hunting rights. I mean, we're all fighting that to this day constantly for our rights. Even here in Rhode Island, there's always a new way that they block our access to the resources. Our reservation land is already pushed back away from the coastline because, of course, the wealth is on the coastline. So they want those resources. And that means they want those salt ponds and they want all these things. But we've always continued to use our right of ways to go to these places. And every year it's a new fight to get in there. This year, because of COVID, in my opinion, they started blocking the way in with big boulders because they didn't want any of the people that should park over at the parking lot to sneak and park across the street. So like if 5 cars parked across the street, they wouldn't get the money for it. But that in doing so, they're also blocking the people, indigenous people, from access to the pond. And they're like, oh, well, you can park 5 miles down the road and walk in, like you're going to do that to get quahaugs, right? or pay $30 if we were, talk about poverty. Statistically across this nation, indigenous people are the most impoverished people, and in Rhode Island that's true as well. Where even when we have degrees, we're underpaid. There's injustice that continues to happen on equity of income.
Yeah.
Equity income, housing income, all of those things. These are fallouts of the conquest and colonization. The subjugation of indigenous people in the 21st century, whether that's uh, school to jail pipelines, driving while Indian and getting stopped and harassed, and those kinds of things that are happening. This is all part of us because it's meant to subjugate us. It's meant to have no voice.
And then to make us dependent, right? Make us dependent on their system, right? So then we feel
right.
we can't be who we are, and we have to try to conform, right? If we want
Right.
to get the better things, right, or the more right, or have the better opportunities, right? So
Right. And we're trying to balance living in the 21st century and still maintaining our cultural knowledge, our traditional ecological knowledge, our cultural ways, ceremonies and life ways. But, and even though we're doing that, I feel like our communities are strong in that way. And we've really held on. And I thank our elders and our ancestors for that, because we couldn't know what we know if they didn't fight through all of this when they did.
right.
But it's I have 2 degrees in education, and it's such a contradiction because education was actually what was meant to de-Indianize us. It was to take away our knowledge, through not just the boarding school system, because that was later in the 1800s, but even before that, every school system, if you will, that was set up, whether it was industrial schools or other kinds of boarding schools that, the friends schools that were, religious schools and things like that, they were all meant to take away our knowledge of ourselves, of our language, our religion, our life ways, our cultural knowledge of our jobs, our hunting, fishing, gathering, songs, stories,
Right.
history, everything.
Right.
And I feel that in the work that I do here, I'm using education in the opposite direction. And that is to make sure that we can bring to the community people that have specialized knowledge, because in all of our communities, I always like to think if you put all of our whole and tribal nation in a circle, like if we could make a big giant 3,000 person circle, right?
Right.
And all the knowledge is inside that circle. The
Right.
thing is, you just need to intersect in
Right.
order to share that knowledge with each other. So, in our individual families and clans, you're constantly passing down your knowledge, but everybody doesn't know everything.
Right.
But historically we didn't, and today we don't.
Right.
But if I can bring into the museum Alan Hazard, who's a wampum artist,
Right.
and he can share with the Native community about cutting and processing and creating wampum, you know, discs or beads out of quahog shell.
Right.
I can, we did a collaborative art installation that is this wampum belt, which is so stunning. And it had, glass bead work as well as wampum work in it. And I think that that's us sharing it back and forth. So he's an expert because he's honed in his life. He's an artist that focuses on that. But then I can bring another elder in, and she can teach pine needle basket making, or I can bring in an artist who's doing quill embroidery or quill wrapping, and so the community can learn and grow as traditional artists in different kinds of ways. And so our staff here does art classes around traditional art forms, basketry, beadwork, weaving, finger weaving, to name just a few.
Right.
And then we also bring in artists that
Right.
have skills like Debbie Moorhead with her painting and mural work, and Dawn Spears and corn husk dolls and her painting and fashion design. Like, we got to learn how she does her style, and kind of incorporated ourselves, and we did
Right.
tote bags.
Oh,
And I'll
good.
have to say mine is nowhere near as good as hers, but but it was fun. You know, it's
Uh,
fun to explore these different artist styles. And really it's about representing your family, your clan, your community, yourself
right,
as an indigenous person. And through the arts, we're able to do that. I mean, arts is a modern day way of thinking about it, but
right.
it's really passing down that knowledge. Like I love to finger weave, and I do traditional things like sashes and belts
Oh,
and
you do?
armbands and leg garters and headbands and things like
That's
that.
so, okay.
But I really like doing modern day stuff. So I make like winter scarves out of like really fluffy, fun material, but it's still the stitches, you know, the weave is still finger weaving, but
Right,
it's a modern day like material so
right.
that you know anybody can wear it at any time. And then I do also art pieces where it's like a hanging.
Hmm.
Um, and that's something that I started maybe 10 years or so ago doing. And my very first piece is called Connection, and it was about the connection between us here on the East Coast
Hmm.
and our relatives that were sold off into slavery um, in the Caribbean,
Right,
and people that landed on in Bermuda and ended up on St. David's Island, and how we made that reconnection back. So like that full circle story. And so the weaving is representing the land and the water.
right,
Um, and then the things that I sewed onto it are antler buttons. So those represent all the land animals, and then shells from Bermuda that represent all the sea animals. And you know, and there's 7 of them going
right,
across it for the 7 generations
right,
behind us and before us.
right,
And so, like, that's I think artists are always trying to tell the stories. We
yeah,
actually do a series called Quarantine Creatives, where we're interviewing, kind of like how you're interviewing me, or we're having a conversation today. We're
right,
interviewing them about themselves as an artist, about their childhood and what led them where they're going, and
right,
about the impacts that this world is having, whether it's the virus that's going on, whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous women, whether it's about the political up, you know, unrest with social justice issues. And people are representing all of these things in their art, you know, because art reflects our lives and
right,
we're telling our stories, and that's all intersecting, whether it's intersecting with Black Lives Matter rallies, or and the idea of, you know, always seems so funny, they're always trying to divide and conquer us,
right,
you know, like you can't be supportive of African Americans and be Indigenous Americans, or vice versa. You know,
right,
they're always, that's that divide and conquer strategy, so that we're, it's them and us against, you know, us against the world, rather than having allies.
right. And you spoke about something a second or a little while ago. There are two things that I really want to kind of chime in on it. When you spoke about your 13 um, harvests, you know, Thanksgivings or ceremonies, how important, when you speak of that, you know, how important is that? Because there are ceremonies around that, right? There are certain ways you do each of those activities, right? Like for instance, when you do the green corn, there's a certain song, there may be several songs, there may be certain processes around that. And and then when you also just spoke about the art, it being for to us, we don't really see it as art, right? That's like you said, that's a modern day, I guess, European way of looking at what we do. To us, it is activity around, you know, things that we could use on an everyday basis, right? But we're, you know, we're creating these things. We're not creating them to show, oh, look how great this is. It's like, oh, well, I made this nice bag so we can carry, you know, 500 fish from the water, right? You know, but it's still it's a, but also in that is there are certain steps that you take, right? So it's almost like a ceremony, right? You to get the finished product, you know, there may be songs that the elders sing when they're doing pine needle baskets or, you know, things like that, right? So, you know, how important, I'm just kind of going off on my question about little few questions I sent you, but you know, how important do you see maintaining not just the activity of it, but actually say like the songs and this, because that is what roots you in your spirituality, right? In the spirit of what you're doing. right? Because you don't want to make these things with a bad, evil mind or bad heart, right? You want to have a good spirit when you do these. So how important is that kind of when in your opinion, with it coming together like that, the ceremony and the activity around it, that's really where I guess the real connection is. It's just not like, okay, put this here and put this there, but why are we doing this, right? And how it's connected to the process. And what do you feel about that? And
Yeah. I definitely think like I think of it very holistically. You're connected to it, mind, body, spirit. And that might sound a little cliche, but it's not, because our elders tell us we are the land. What we do to the land, we do to ourselves. And so when you're giving thanks, you have to actually be there and be present, present in mind and in body and in spirit. And the songs that are passed down, that they connect us to the generations that came before us. The songs that are created today connect us to this present moment. And the songs of the future ensure our continuation. You know, I'm sure if we could go in a time machine back in time and how I introduced myself, our ancestors might laugh. But the language has been passed down. But do we have influences from the English? Sure. Do we not say things the way our ancestors once did? Sure. But guess what? English didn't have any interruption in the sense of colonization and conquest, and their language changed significantly for over 400 years as well.
yes.
So, and we've had the interruption of that it was against the law at times for us to speak our language. We had the interruption of forced assimilation through education. We've had, the struggle of not having fully fluent communities. Our community is more fluent today than it ever has been in the modern world. There's a lot of people speaking the language and using it in songs and in greetings and in simple dialogue and in prayer and ceremony, all of those things. But that's something that's been being passed down generationally. And it has continued. I mean, I think, back over even my 54-year lifetime, I mean, my mother was the language teacher, and Ella Sikatow before her, and before Ella, Cecil Addison. And that brings you back to the early 1900s. We were detribalized illegally by the state of Rhode Island in the 1880s. And it took 101 years, pretty much, over 100 years, to prove that that was an illegal action when we gained federal recognition in 1983. But in that 100 years, they could write whatever they wanted to write, because on their law, we didn't exist. The people, the humans existed, but the entity, the nation, didn't exist on paper.
Right.
And so it took that 100 years. So during that time, there were remarkable people doing remarkable things, making sure we were visible. There were all the people that were serving on the church board, that were hosts. People think the church board, why do you bring that up? It's so important to our community, because the same people that ran the quote unquote Christian church also ran our traditional ceremonies.
Right.
So they were mixing the two things together, because guess what? In colonization and conquest, it was a necessary thing to have the church. So you have the church and you control the church. Our church never had European ministers in it. From the very beginning, we had indigenous ministers, most of which were Narragansett, but we had one Pequot at the very beginning and one Wampanoag along the way, Usamiquan.
Right.
And then the rest were all Narragansett. So the idea that we were taking control of that, but those same people were running the annual August meeting, which is our powwow today, but it's really our green corn harvest Thanksgiving that was morphed due to this sort of colonial construct into this bigger thing that became the powwow over time. And as you know, powwow comes from the word powwow, which really meant the medicine person or the spiritual leader that led the ceremony. And the Europeans got it confused, and somehow or another it stuck. And now here across the nation, we call this kind of a gathering a powwow.
Say terms.
Yeah, terms, And so I think that there's just I think I forgot the question.
That's okay. No, I was just saying, like you said, about how important ceremonies and stuff
Oh,
are with,
yes.
with
Yeah.
with the art and the things and the activity and just how, how strong that is, continuing, and to be able to
Yeah.
continue that.
So I think it's really critically important. And, it's something that I've always been part of in my lifetime. My parents and grandparents, they always brought me to all the ceremonies, ceremonies in our community, some that were directly within the tribal governmental structure, but also others that were just part of community entities, community organizations, including Tamaquag Museum, that has held and led Thanksgivings since 1958. Um, some of which that are for the public, and some things that are just for the Native community. And when we are at our tribal community center, those are mostly for just the Native community. But August meeting powwow is open to the public. On a non-COVID year, we have those things. But even with this crazy year we're living in, our people are adaptive. So our leaders, ceremonial leaders and political leaders, they still came together and held a small ceremony to ensure that something that's been ongoing for thousands of years happened this year. It's been recorded for 345 years. So they did that there, but tribal families, they did their ceremonies in their own homes. And you can kind of think of it in our history. When all the villages were all over this region, we didn't always go, okay, we're all going to go to this one space. We had those Thanksgivings in our own villages, and, maybe some villages came together, but, you're talking thousands of people. And so if you're talking, I think one number was 100,000 people. If there's 100,000 Narragansett back in Verrazano's days, we weren't all going to one spot to have this event. So people would have it. So we kind of likened it to that. We were going back to our history where people were having it in their family and in their clan groupings, and having it at home. But we also did the virtual thing, so Tamaquag Museum, we worked with another tribal member, and he started it, which right now his name is eluding my brain, but he started it and we helped him. And so we started posting out historic pictures from our archive of August meeting, and pictures just recently that we had from August meeting, and video clips and things like that. So we did a virtual powwow too. It was a lot of fun. People are adaptive, and we think tradition is important and ceremony is important. So people were having those ceremonies in their own space. And I think each of our Thanksgivings have their own special, as you mentioned, songs. If it's maple sugar Thanksgiving, you're singing about maple and the harvest of the maple. You're not singing about the harvest of the cranberry, or you're not telling the story of the cranberry. You're telling the story of the maple, and so each of these Thanksgivings has their own traditional stories. They have their own songs, but then there's social songs that you might do after the ceremony that might overlap in places, but there's also social songs that are for different times of the year. You might do the robin dance, in the spring as the robins are coming into being. You might do each one might have its own time that you might do more of one or the other based on the season.
Yeah, that's great, because I'm a singer. I sing, as I told you, I sing with Silver Cloud Singers, and but when I was in North Carolina, I sung with a few groups down there, but also learning the specific songs. I don't know them. Of course, I don't know probably a tenth of them, but and because each of those things and those activities have a spirit to them, right? There's an energy in that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, like when you sing the maple sugar song or the strawberry harvest song, festival, you're singing to that element that's giving, actually, because maple syrup can sustain you. You can sustain yourself on maple syrup, right? I mean, pure maple syrup. It ain't the best tasting when it ain't processed, but it has everything in it needs for your body, right? So that's, I mean, again, but that's also connecting us to it because it provides substance for us, right?
Now the song is "We Coney Neep," sweet water. That's all we need.
Yeah,
Uh, and it's like when you think about when it comes, you could still be 6 feet of snow on the ground, but the sap starts running. And can you imagine when you're living literally off the land and there's no grocery store to, type into a computer for you to get your delivery?
right,
You have to actually create your, the earth is your store. And so when the sap starts running, it's significant for multiple reasons. It's significant for the nutrients that it gives you at that time of the year, but it's also significant as part of the change of the seasons to let you know
right,
that spring is coming. And if it was a particularly long winter,
right,
you know now it's close. Even if there's snow on the ground, you know that the days are getting longer, the sun is getting brighter, the resources are coming. I mean, we live in an amazing ecosystem here in southern New England with four distinct seasons, with saltwater, bay, ocean, estuaries, salt ponds. We have freshwater lakes, ponds, rivers, streams. We have the fields and the forests. Um, the harvest of the resources in our ecosystem of hunting, fishing, gathering, as well as agriculture. It gave us what we needed. And when we had the gift of the corn and the bean from the crow, that really sustained us over the long winters, because we had these nutrients to add to our dried fish and our dried meat and these other edibles that were preserved, roots and tubers and things of that nature. I always love when I ask kids if they ever eat roots, and they always go, "Ew, no, we don't eat roots."
no,
And I'm like,
yeah,
"Oh, do
potato,
you?" I'm like, "Have you ever eaten a carrot?" And they're
carrot,
like, "Oh yeah." you know, they're like automatically, "No, you eat roots, you're
right,
weird."
right, right,
So,
yeah,
I think that our ancestors knew how to sustain themselves and to prepare for the winter, and then of course still hunt and fish, ice fish in the winter, and have the stores. The cache is full of corn
right,
and dried beans and other kinds of tubers and things like that that could be preserved in the ground, and that sustained us. But the maple was important because it told you a lot about where you were at in the winter,
right,
and it gave you all that nutrients, and you had to work for it. If you wanted to have maple syrup or maple sugar or maple candy,
right,
you had to really work for that, and it taught you fortitude,
right. Right. And it built,
and
yeah, it built in a respect for it, right? And a reverence for it as a sense of, like you say, because people, so much is a waste nowadays, right? People don't,
Mhm.
they don't understand the process of how they get what they eat at their table, how it gets to them, right? They don't look at that. But for us that have come through that process, we have a reverence for that because we know it is a gift. It's nothing more than a gift that's been given by the Creator to us to sustain us at a moment in time to get us to the next thing, right?
So
Um,
true.
so I know we're getting a little quick on time. I know time is going to always run by us. But I know our listeners are probably not going to sit for 2 hours, which we could probably talk for three. Um, what is some things that I just kind of like to spring forward a little bit, and what are some of the things culturally from your community's perspective and your perspective? How do you see, I guess some of our traditional ways or cultural ways actually could be actually better for the country as a whole, like going forward in the future. Like you spoke about earlier, there's so much, there's just so much unrest at every level in society today, right? Whether it's, the issue of, politics or social justice issues, or, the violence towards women, or the issues with the climate, and then of course all of that, economics is all played into all of those areas, right? Whether people, especially like with climate and politics, but then if you think about with murder, missing indigenous women, right? A lot of that's happening because of these alternative forms of, extraction from the land is taking place in certain areas where women are, that, it's all tied together, right? So, And
Right.
because like you said, we don't see anything separate. Everything has a link somewhere, right? In this circle, in this paradigm. And so, how do you see, like not not like say taking it back to culture, but how can culture now be applied? Because we come through the last 200 years of contact to how we are. How do you see it benefit, our culture, like benefiting us as well as maybe even the outside world if they choose to, not really say want to be Indian because they never be Indian, right? You can't learn how to be Indian. You're just Indian, right? You're just indigenous native. But what do you see in that? And it's kind of maybe something of a hope or,
I think living in balance. I think it's living in balance. I think that's something that our elders have taught us. And when you think about that, that connects to the extractive economy. That's not living in balance. When we talk about our economy where the majority of the wealth is way up here in the 1 to 10%, and then the poverty is with most everyone else, that's not living in balance. It's not caring for the earth and to care for yourself. I think the food sovereignty initiatives and other initiatives around food, the farm to table, um, the waters to table or forest to table kind of concepts, that's eating in your own ecosystem and creating that balance in that. I think that when we talk about balance, it really covers all those areas. Whether that's politics, there's got to be balance. We don't all agree. You and I could have a longer conversation, and there may be things we don't agree on, even though we seem like we're very compatible in ideology. But with that being said, when you're living in balance, you listen. Our ancestors had talking feathers or talking sticks, and the point was so that everyone listened to everyone else
right,
and then made an informed decision.
right,
And I think it wasn't listening just to the people who think like you
right, right,
and not just against the people that don't think like you, but listening to everyone and finding the value in what they say and then making decisions based on that balance. So I think it's living in balance, and I think that's something that our ancestors did, and I think that's something that culturally has been passed down to us to do. And I think if all of us lived in more balance in our lives, work home balance,
right. Oh,
time for self-nurturing balance.
right,
We're all living with a lot of stress right now,
right,
and that means we need to breathe. We need to go out and take a walk. We need to exercise. We need to spend a little less time in these chairs, because Zoom has really increased, COVID-19 has really increased the amount of time all of us are spending sitting in a chair. um, we have to have time for fun, and I think when we think of Thanksgiving and our ancestors, that event had the coming together of family, clan, community. It has the ceremony part, it has the feasting part, and then it had the fun.
right.
You
Yeah,
know,
activities, right? Yeah,
you
that
know,
is,
there were games,
yeah,
types of football
right,
and stickball and ring and pin and hubbub and moccasin game, and
right,
there was dancing for fun. I mean, when we go to a powwow today, there's powwow songs that are demonstration, that are one part of ceremony at the beginning, but then there's also those that are demonstrations that really are from ceremonies that we might do in our community, but we only show a demonstration version of it. Whether that's jingle or Eastern blanket, to give just an example. One's a healing ceremony and one is a courtship ceremony, originally, so you're getting a demonstration at the powwow of that particular dance. And then there's the fun,
right.
the social fun dances, whether that's stomp dance
Right.
or robin dance or two
Alligator
steps
dance,
or rabbit dance. There's all these dances that are social fun dances, some of which may have originally come from some ceremonial dances as well. um, you know I think that people have to look at it in that holistic way. And that, in a nutshell, even just the idea of Thanksgiving, that's holistic, that's in balance. You've got the ceremony, you've got the fun, that's the balance of those things, and the coming together. It's really important. So I would say I think you could apply balance to everything.
Yeah,
And, our symbol here for Tamaquag Museum, which if I tip it up a little bit more, you can see the whole thing.
uh-huh,
It's in balance.
right,
It's showing elements for the land and the water, the directions, the above, the below, everything. We're here on Turtle Island and we need to live in balance with this. We only have one Earth.
yes.
Now, maybe the rest of those explorer type people are planning on moving to Mars. I don't know. But my grandmother and my grandmother was a wise woman, and she said they can go, but I'm staying here because this is where we belong.
Right,
This
right,
is our place. This is our home
yes,
on Nukasaki, Mother Earth. This is our mother, and our job is to take care of it. And one of the things my grandmother said is, what do they expect if you keep drilling holes down in it? And what do you think's going to happen? That was when sinkholes kept being on the news
right,
that were popping up all over the place. She's like, if you keep taking everything away from it, what do you expect to happen? And
yeah,
I think when you live in balance, you don't have those kinds of things happening because you're living in balance. You're not creating an imbalance that has to cause a reaction.
right,
Um, and and I think that's true across the board. In our relationships, we have to be in balance, and we have to heal in order to be in balance. We have to heal from the historical trauma that's befallen our people. We have to heal from the lateral traumas or generational traumas that continue to happen because of this oppressive circumstances that have happened to our people in our history, the conquest and colonization that we're still feeling the pains from. We have to heal from that. And that means finding that balance. That means having those ceremonies. It means having those sweat lodges so that, you know, our communities are doing all those things. We're probably just not doing them enough.
right,
The modern world sometimes gets in the way,
right,
and we need to be having them so that the younger people that are coming of age that can be doing certain ceremonies, that they're getting a full opportunity to do it. And people are doing them, and families and clans and tribal nations are doing them,
yeah.
but maybe not as pervasively as they need to be done, that they would have been done before all of this 400 years transpired.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I'm kind of going to wrap it up with this because we're getting near very close to our last 2 or 3 minutes. But that is exactly, you pretty much said an exact ending there that Tom Porter said the other day, because I asked him in relationship to the same kind of a question in a different way, but same ending question. And the first thing was live with the balance that the creator has taught us, or he showed us, right? And that we are caretakers here. We're not here to dominate. We're not here to, subjugate, but we're here as caretakers of this and to create, then we may get out of balance here or there, but to strive to stay in that balance, right? And like you say, your life, your work, your social, your fun, it just it's exciting to hear that same thing from him, right? And then he talked about the young people, right, coming back, because he talked about being in a longhouse and it not be nobody there but older people at one time. But he's like, now it's like standing room only with young people, middle-aged people, older, and he said that's beautiful. And like you said earlier, that you really give honor to those elders that stayed strong, like Tall Oak and all of those, because doing back then, I definitely know that they like, what in the world am I doing? This is none of my people are gonna come back, right? But they, for whatever, fortitude they had and where they ever kept getting that energy from, they stuck with it. And look, like you said, you got the young people now wanting to learn and come back and understand these things. And this is the same thing he said a week ago. It's like you guys are the same people now. It's like this is beautiful, and I love that. And so, yeah,
You made me think of something that I was thinking of earlier. People like Tall Oak and Jim Frazier and a whole slew of other people. I don't know all their names,
right,
but they were the ones that back in the 70s, I think, they started the National Day of Mourning that takes place down in Plymouth.
uh-huh.
Um, understanding that that was the pivotal moment that changed our existence.
Yes.
Yeah, King Philip's War put the nail in the coffin, if you will. That's a very bad analogy or a horrifying analogy, but nonetheless, it was this pivotal moment in time when these new people came to this land that couldn't be in balance, couldn't share and collaborate and cooperate in a way that still allowed indigenous people to be here and to live in this space the way that they always had. Even though the generosity of the Wampanoag people and other indigenous communities in welcoming these foreigners to this land and being willing to share and collaborate with them, but not knowing that they didn't live in balance, that they lived to dominate and subjugate, as you said, is really critical. So that's kind of a sad note. So I'm going to leave it on a positive note for kids and families. We have a lovely children's hour that we're launching from our YouTube page, YouTube/Tamaquag Museum. And it's really fun. It's animated. Lindsay, who's a Narragansett young woman, 24, soon to be 25, has been animating it. And her first one was about Cranberry Thanksgiving. Really? So you can, and so we have another one about the harvest of pumpkins and things like that. So you'll have some fun there. On our website, tamaquagmuseum.org, we have lots of resources, a blog and a podcast and lots of educational resources on our resources page, so people can check us out and visit us virtually if they can't visit us in person. We are doing small private tours from 5 to 15 here at the museum during this COVID time, and doing lots of virtual programming where we're doing programs for schools and organizations and adults and children on a myriad of topics that they can call us up at 401-491-9063 or check us out online at tamaquagmuseum.org.
Beautiful. Thank you, because I'm going to I have several people that are talking about like some of their schools and now like looking at, of course, revamping curriculum and all of that. And, I've been kind of pulling the resources I knew at the time together, but maybe, like you said, that animated series, especially for young kids, would be spot on. And I already got several people lined up that I'm gonna tell them about it. So when you send me your information, make sure I have the link to the museum, but make sure I have all of that like in an email and stuff like that, and I'll definitely get that out as well. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Katabatash. Wuni Tabutan Tamawonk. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Paleyuk Biwa to you. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Katabatash.